there's a woman named Wendy Wood who's a researcher now at USC who followed around a number of people for a long time, basically trying to figure out how much of the choices that they made every day were actual choices and how many of them were just habits, things that they did almost unthinkingly. And what she found is that 40 to 45% of what we do every single day is a habit. Now, most habits start as a choice, right? You choose to, get dessert after dinner. And then eventually a habit becomes this choice that you stop making but continue acting on. You just always grab a dessert after dinner because it's just the habit you've fallen into. It's part of your routine. It just happens automatically. And if you look at people's lives, a lot of what they think of as choices have actually become habits, right? The way we back the car out of the driveway has become a habit. The route we take to work becomes a habit so that you get to stop thinking about it. And this is actually really, really important because every single animal on Earth has a part of its brain known as the basal ganglia. And the basal ganglia basically exists to create habits. And it's really important to create those habits because if you had to make a choice every single time you did everything, if you had to choose between eating the berry and eating the rock instead of just habitually grabbing the berry and bypassing the rock, you basically nothing would ever evolve. You would have so much cognitive overload that you would never have time to think of other activities, to evolve, to invent the wheel or aircraft carriers or video games. And so habits are incredibly important. Animals that never develop the part of their brain that helps them develop habits, they basically are dead ends. They kind of die out relatively quickly from a geological perspective. And so these habits that being about half of our life, that's a good thing. The key is that you want it to be habits you choose, habits you like, rather than habits that just happen to you.
So that was Charles Duhigg, you just heard, author of The Power of Habit, which we will be reviewing some of the core paradigms today. What I love about what Charles just said is that almost half of what we do every single day in our lives isn't actually a conscious decision. It's a habit. That's both fascinating and also kind of scary. It means that, because it means that a large part of our life just runs on autopilot, which can either work for us or against us. Now, when it comes to books on habits, I think I read a statistic one time that, putting the word habit in a book increases the ability that it's going to sell more. Literally there's stuff around that. So like you go out and you look at books out there, especially in like business and personal development, there's a lot of books that mention the word habit. But in my mind, and I think Britt's mind as well, I think there are three like foundational books when it comes to habits. So obviously we're biased and we put our grandpa's book, number 1, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. The second book, in our opinion, that's kind of foundational to this idea of habit is The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, which we're talking about today. And then the third book, we would consider it to be Atomic Habits by James Clear. And again, if James is listening to this, which I doubt he is, or if someone knows James Clear, let him know he needs to be on this podcast. Because we will get James Clear at some point. We're really hoping because we love his work. But if you really take those 3 books on habits, each builds on the other. So our grandfather's book, 7 Habits, kind of gave us the idea of principles and paradigms. Charles Duhigg gives us the science of how habits actually work in the brain. And then James Clear, who, again, hope to have join us soon, kind of built to show us how to design systems that make good habits inevitable. But again, when you take a step back and look at the work of habits out there, Charles Duhigg's book, The Power of Habit, is like it's a seminal work. So we're excited to talk a little bit about that. Britt, what's when you think of habits, where does your brain go?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think it actually says something about human nature, that idea that if you put the word habit in a book, that it instantly, sells more. And I think it's because all of us recognize the power of habit, right, in our lives. And I think all of us naturally kind of want a guidebook or a step-by-step plan on how to just change our day or make it a little bit better. Really, what's funny is when you hear the word habit, I would say the vast majority of us, at least me, I think about like the bigger habits in my life. Like when you think of habit, you think of either the bigger habits in your day that you don't like, or the bigger habits in your day that you do like, or you're trying to do. Like go to the gym, do all these things. Let me think. Eat right. A lot of diet habits, right? A lot of diets have habits involved. Read this gratitude journal. What I love about this, though, is most of the habits are not big. What route do you take to work? For me, I'm curious. I bet everybody listened to this. Everybody that listened to this and that little clip at the beginning, some little tiny habit came to your mind. Liz Wiseman says that we tie the same shoe every day, that in order, right to left or left to right. I didn't even know that, and I realized I tie my right shoe every day. I take the same exact pathway to work. I take even in the hallway, the hallway splits into two. I don't know why every single time I take the right hallway. Even on the way back, it's the left hallway, but it's not a faster route. So it's just funny. We all have these little habits, and some of them are positive, some negative, and some neutral. So it'd be fun to kind of analyze your day and realize, okay, how much of my life is just, am I programmed? And where can I make little subtle differences, I guess?
Yeah, it's kind of like you said, it's the beauty and the danger of habits. They're powerful, but like you said, they're neutral. So they'll either serve you or sabotage you depending on, how intentional you are about shaping them. So the next clip I want to share is, which I thought was fascinating. It's a question that we've always asked the authors around this idea of why did you write The Power of Habit? And usually this answer is pretty similar. So I think everyone will be interested to hear the way that Charles responded to this.
Everyone who writes a book that has advice in it, it's because they're trying to solve a problem for themselves. It's not because they're an expert on the problem. It's because they want to figure out how to deal with that problem. And so next year is the 10th anniversary of The Power of Habit. And when I first started writing it, my son was about to be born. He's 13 now. So I started writing it before it was published, and he was about to be born. And I basically had this sort of question, which is if I'm so smart and so good at stuff, right? Like I had gone to Yale and to Harvard, and I was a journalist at the New York Times, and felt like I was pretty accomplished in some respects. But if I'm so smart and so special and so great, like, why can't I get myself to get up and go running in the morning, right? Like why is it so hard for me to eat smaller portions? And then my son was born, and you have kids, right?
Yeah, I do. I've got four kids. So
okay, so you've been through this too. When your kids are young and they start moving to eating from like baby food to like real food, and they start eating like these little chicken nuggets, right, in the shapes of dinosaurs, and they're not that good, but they're just addictive for some reason. And like I would be sitting at the dinner table, I would have already eaten dinner, my son would be eating his like dinosaur chicken nuggets, which basically melt in your mouth as soon as you put them in, and I would just like reach over and grab one and pop it in my mouth. And I knew that like not only was this not healthy, like it's not like I needed this food, but B, I'm taking food literally from my own child. But I wouldn't even think about it. It would just happen automatically. And so I had this basic question, which was like, how do I control the habits? Like, how do the habits in my life work? And how do I get more control over them? What do I need to know in order to get myself to run more often and eat more healthily and X and Y and Z? And most importantly, I don't want it to be hard. I want it to be easy. There's lots of things I do in my life that just feel like I'm on autopilot, like I don't even have to think about them. And so I wanted to answer that question, and that became The Power of Habit.
Yeah, I love what he says. In a lot of these cases, you know what you should and shouldn't do, right, with these habits, but for some reason you just don't do it. Going back to my route in the hallway at work, I kind of, after thinking a few more minutes, I realized part of the reason why is because to the left in Paul's office, there's a little candy jar, and half the time throughout my day, I stop and get a little candy. I probably get 5 or 6 little candies a day, unconsciously at this point. So that is definitely why I choose the left hallway. But yes, so many of these habits, you just do or don't do it for some reason. I think something cool that he talks a little bit about in his book, James Clear talks a little bit about, is this idea of when habits are just out in front of us, they make it a lot harder, almost like this willpower that you have to decide to not do something or to do something. But you can eliminate habits altogether with one big choice. And that's something that they teach about in changing your habits is do one choice that will eliminate 5 other habits, right? So, for example, one of the examples used in some of his work is when you're grocery shopping and you don't buy the snacks, right? And that way they're not in your pantry. So that when you're in the house and you're looking and you feel that craving for a snack and you look and you literally don't have it, it takes the habit, it takes the decision out of it, right? For me personally, I've been using this device on my phone called the Brick, which you put me on, Stephen, which actually locks all of the, so like you have it right there.
I've got it right
locks
here. We're not sponsored by them, but this is worth checking out for sure.
Yeah, maybe we should be. Let's reach out to them.
Yeah, let's do it.
But it locks whatever apps you choose. So it locks you out of all of your social media. And I have noticed that when I do that, one, I realize how much of a habit checking social media is because I go to check it but it's not there. And so that one decision kind of eliminates all of my bad habits in the future. So it's kind of finding those big decisions, big choices that will do it. And then a lot of what he talks about too is, under pressure, you don't rise to the level of what you know, like we've talked about in the past on this podcast. You fall to the level of your habits or your systems. So in football, I think about this all the time is you try and do the most basic drills over and over and over and over again until they're an unconscious movement. And I'm talking basic drills. And the whole point of it is so that they are those unconscious habits so that you don't have to think about them. So you can use them once again for good or bad.
100%. So this next clip we're going to share is where Charles starts explaining what he calls the habit loop. And it's not just him that has called it, but it's in research and data. But it's a simple 3-step process that drives almost everything we do. So the 3 aspects of a habit is the cue, the routine, and the reward. And again, once you understand that pattern and you start seeing it everywhere, then it actually helps you analyze your habits, kind of like Britt has when he's talking about walking down the hallway and noticing all these things. So this next clip is a good clip where Charles Duhigg gives a good overview of the 3 parts of a habit.
We think of a habit as one thing, but it's actually 3 things. It's a cue, which is a trigger for an automatic behavior to start. And then the routine, which is the behavior itself. And then finally, a reward. Every single habit in your life delivers some reward to you, whether you're aware of it or not. When you back your car out of the driveway successfully, there is a part of your brain that has been anticipating getting into the street successfully, and it'll actually release little neurotransmitters of celebration, dopamine, that you can't even really notice or feel, but your brain notices and feels them, and so it makes it into a habit. And what's important is that there's this cue, routine, and reward, what's known as the habit loop. And for a long time, most people have just focused on the routine, on the behavior itself. But what we know is that if you really focus on the cue and the reward, that's where you get the greatest efficacy in order to change that habit. So this guy Claude Hopkins, who is a marketer, was asked, he was given a stake in Pepsodent if he could figure out how to sell it nationally. And before, there had always been toothpaste for a long time. A lot of them were tooth powders and things like that. And they would offer this reward of beautiful teeth, but it just basically didn't work. Like, people would forget to use toothpaste. It seemed like a luxury item, so maybe they would buy it and use it like once every 2 weeks if they're going out to some event. They wanted to make toothbrushing into a daily habit, right? That's how you sell toothpaste. And so almost by accident, the guy who had invented Pepsodent, he had put this oil into it to give it like a minty taste, but he used a formulation of the oil that had a little bit of citric acid in it. And so it made people's gums tingle. It's basically an irritant, right? So when you brush your teeth and you got that kind of tingling feeling on your gums, that's because they've added an irritant into the toothpaste to sort of do that. But what would happen is that people would feel that sensation, that tingling mouth, and and they came to see it as a reward. They came to associate it with being clean, right? Because they would brush their teeth and they think of that as being clean, and they would feel the tingling, and they associated that, and that became a reward in and of itself. And so the key was that once Claude Hopkins established a reward that was actually consistent, a reward you could feel, that was real, that was something that was always associated with a product, then toothpaste and toothbrushing started to become a habit. Because the problem is that if you just say, if you have beautiful teeth, well, half the time you're not really going to get the reward, right? It's not like you transform your appearance when you brush your teeth. And also, like, it's a reward that is contingent on other people saying to you, your teeth look really nice, which most people aren't going to say all the time. Whereas tingling is something that happens every single time. And so this is kind of the point, is that, and now every toothpaste on earth adds some type of, basically it's a derivative of citric acid to cause your teeth, in order to cause your gums to tingle. And the reason why they do that is because, for me, like when I step out of the shower and I don't have that tingling feeling in my mouth that I've come to associate with being clean, then I feel like I'm missing something. I don't feel totally clean. So then I go brush my teeth and I get the tingling feeling, and now I feel clean. So it's the craving for the reward that really drives the habit. And it's really important to establish that sense of craving, to give people something, right? So for instance, why is like fast food or donuts a habit? Why is it so hard to resist? Well, it's because the thing about carbohydrates is that your body, when it sees a carbohydrate, it begins anticipating the pleasure it's going to get from it. So donuts is a great example. If you smell a donut or you see a donut, your part of your brain begins anticipating this little burst of pleasure you're going to get from eating that sugar and carbohydrates. And so the craving for the reward is what drives that habit.
Okay, let me just start off by saying I feel totally lied to now. I thought the more tingle you had, the more clean that your teeth were. So I would search for the most tingly. If I could have a toothpaste of straight citric acid, I would have done that, because
Oh. Well, that story is incredible. And he in the book, he goes pretty in depth. And basically what he talks about more in the book that we didn't mention in the clip was, at the time before that campaign and before Claude kind of discovered this tactic, only 10% of Americans at the time brushed their teeth daily. So this was, it was actually, it talks about in the book, like this was like a public health crisis in a way too. And then once they, put the tingly feeling, essentially within a few years, that number skyrocketed to over 65% of Americans brushing their teeth. And today, I think it's over, the stats are something like over 90%. So what's another great thing about this book, Power of Habit, is not just it doesn't just cover your individual habits, but it talks about like habits on a societal level too. Which is fascinating and also scary. And then you think about like algorithms today and the habits we have around our phones. Like there's a lot of things that kind of goes down that can be kind of scary.
Yeah. Well, so it's right. It's this 3-step thing, this idea of cue and then routine and then reward. And so, it's pretty simple to think about, but there's so many cues. He lists in his book, cues are usually down to 5 things: location, time, emotional state, the actions of other people, or an immediately preceding action. Right. So any of those 5 things could be a cue, and I could definitely go through and list a lot of the cues in time or location, or even an interesting one to me is emotional state. That can be a cue for a lot of your habits. So it makes you want to go analyze your own brain and see what rewards you're kind of addicted to, right? Or what rewards you think of. That toothpaste one, it kind of reminds me in a funny way of lifting, and how there are certain lifts and movements that I feel the burn in, and I always feel like in my mind they work better because I can feel the burn. And then there are certain movements and lifts that I don't feel the burn in. Maybe I'm sore the next day, and I always feel like they don't work and I'm always wondering why these strength trainers are having us do this. And I'm like, oh, this thing does nothing for you. But it's just because in my mind, I associate that quote unquote feeling with the reward, and it makes me want to do it more. Something interesting So our cousin, Colin Cole, he helped found a company called Gab Wireless, for those who know what Gab is, and they make these smartphones for kids that basically take out a lot of the bad stuff, right? And once again, not sponsored by them, but just talking about them. And they go a lot into the research behind the dopamine and how the dopamine hits from social media and your phone literally are so hardwired into our brains now that they are so habitual and almost physically impossible to break. And you have to do it. There's so many cues for them. All 5 of those things could be cues to just pull out your phone. Location, the moment that you sit down on the toilet, what's your initial thing that you do as you get on your phone, right? Time at night or when you wake up, what's your initial thing? There's literally a dopamine response to get on your phone. The actions of other people, emotions, emotional state. What do you want to do? You want to dissociate and get on your phone. Anyways, so some of these are so powerful. And I think this is a really good book if you want to read about how to build new habits and kind of break some of those older ones. And he talks a lot about in this last clip, right? Replacing these habits is kind of how you go about it. Anyways, your thoughts?
Yeah, and I think again with a book like this, it's when I first read it, I was pretty taken back and shocked and thinking about, okay, half my life is based on unconscious habits, and then the whole societal level is just a whole other thing that kind of freaks you out. But I think the first step in wanting to change and become better is you have to have an awareness about it. So don't fear this. Just kind of embrace it so you can understand it. But that's kind of the first step in changing. And how we're going to end the episode today is we're going to end with Charles on this last clip where he goes into what he calls the golden rule of habit change, where the big idea in the kind of paradigm is you can't erase a habit, you can only replace it, which is interesting. Yeah. So you keep the same cue and reward, but you swap out the routine in the middle. Simple idea, but it changes, can change everything potentially.
Yeah. And one last thing I'll add to that, we didn't get him talking about it on the interview, but something he references in his book about changing habits is successful people, they make a plan in advance of what they're going to do when there's a pain point, when there's a cue, when there's something difficult that arises. So if you are trying to change a bad habit, right, or start a good one, people that are successful at doing that, he talks about they make a plan in advance of what they're going to do when there's a pain point. He uses the example of people with knee replacement surgeries. And I know because I've had my ACL and meniscus done and repaired, that the rehab process for that is so difficult and painful at times that if you're waiting until the moment to do it, you will not have the mental strength to push through it. So you literally have to make a plan in advance. When this arises, when I can't straighten my leg and it's so painful in this rehabilitation session, here's what I'm going to do. And so you make that plan in advance. So when you know that there's going to be some gravitational habit in your day that is just going to really test you, and you ask yourself, this is a willpower habit. Like, will I have the willpower? If you make that plan early in advance, and Stephen, our grandfather, Stephen Covey, talked about this all the time. He had a morning routine that he went through every day. And in that morning routine, he basically lived out his day. He would anticipate the difficult points of his day and basically make the decision there that morning so that when it came up in the day, he had already felt like he made it. He already had the power to overcome it. So anyways, didn't know if you want to add anything to that as well.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up, Britton, because that is something that our grandfather talked to us all the time about visualizing your day and literally visualizing and living out that instance where you normally fold and make a bad choice. Maybe it's patience with your kids. And if you in the morning live that out, literally visualize what happens and how you normally respond, But then you say, you know what, I'm going to visualize responding differently and being proactive. And then it's not a fail safe, but your chances of actually responding differently are massive. So again, that's kind of talking about beginning of the day, and visualization, which I know, Britain, for you has been a huge thing for you in your career in football around visualization. So again, thank you everyone so much for listening. Thank you, Charles Duhigg, for your thoughts. He is such an intelligent person. I was pretty nervous when I initially interviewed him, but it's definitely worth a read. He also just released another book called Super Communicators. That's absolutely worth a read. His writing is just incredible. So let's end with this last clip of Charles talking about the golden rule of habit change. Thanks, everyone.
When most people talk about habits, they talk about breaking a habit. I want to break this bad habit. And the problem is that that's influenced how we think about habits, because we tend to think about getting rid of bad habits in terms of extinguishing them, right? Sort of making them disappear. But what all the science tells us is that's basically kind of impossible, and it's the wrong way to think about it. So they've done experiments where they take rats and they put them in mazes, and they have cues and routines and rewards, and they train them to run through that maze on a habit, right? They'll react immediately. And then they'll take the rat away from the maze, like for, months, sometimes years. And then one day they'll bring the rat back to the maze, and the habit will come back just like that. And the reason why is because this habit loop, this cue and this routine and this reward, it's associated with actual neural circuitry, right? Like when you develop a habit, what's happening inside your brain is that some of the neural connections are becoming slightly thicker than others that are associating that cue, that routine, that reward. So as a result, an electrical pulse can move down that connection faster and easier than other connections. And so the habits in our brain, well, just because you try and take the mouse away from the maze, or just because you try and extinguish a habit, that doesn't make that neural connection go away. It's still there. It's still just waiting. And you can use willpower, right? We can definitely all use willpower to say, even though I see the donut store and I smell the donuts and I really want one, I'm going to say no. I'm going to deny myself. Through willpower, you can try and extinguish the habit, but it'll always be there and it'll always be a temptation. So what's much better is what's known as the golden rule of habit change. What the golden rule of habit change says is, instead of trying to extinguish a habit, instead of trying to break a habit, change a habit. Replace one habit with something new by piggybacking on what already exists. So figure out what the cue is, the routine, and the reward, and then find a new behavior, a new routine that corresponds to that old cue and that delivers something similar to that old reward. And just put that new behavior in. And that way, the neural circuitry, instead of having to use your willpower, instead of tempting you, it just shifts slightly. And as a result, you now have something else to do when that habit would normally strike, something a little bit healthier.